It is a real challenge to simultaneously have people layering what Christ is doing in their lives on top of those social relationships and letting them get deeper. And at the same time, creating those weak relationships where there's room for somebody else to be part of the gathering and what God's doing here. Because we all have a relational bandwidth.
Today we're going to be talking about relationships, all about relationships within the church. So, Chris, what do you think is helpful when we have those kinds of activities?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things, and we talk about this a little in our conversation with David coming up, but also one of the things that is natural in rural places and in rural churches, and that is good for us to lean into, is just that things happen in a relational way. Our churches are relational places. People may go to, even in a rural place, people kind of, they may go to churches for different programming offerings or maybe, but like it's just very different than the reason people go to the church they go to in a more suburban context, right? Like, probably very few rural. I shouldn't say. Now I'm going to say something that's unfair to rural churches. I pastor a rural church, and I often half the time, not half the time, but maybe a third of the time, I am part of like the musical worship that happens at church. That is not so nobody comes to church. I'm going to say, at least when I'm playing, because the music is amazing, right? It's not terrible. We worship God. I think it's fun sometimes, even, and it can be like engaging, but it's not like technically great. I can guarantee you. So I think like people come to church in a rural place. Hopefully people are coming to church because they want to get to know Jesus. I mean, obviously that's what we're after. But people come to your church and my church and other people's churches because in a rural place, because they're connecting relationally with people. And so when you have a strength, a natural strength, you should lean into it. That's not to say, because we're all going to have natural weaknesses, natural strengths, and it's not to say that you shouldn't work on improving your weaknesses. You should. So, like, it's a good thing to try to make your musical worship good, right? Like, that's a good thing. But if you have a strength of relationship, you should lean in. And I think one of the things that's neat about this chance, and this idea did not start with us. Blessings from on high, right? When a good idea at church starts from within the congregation, when you're a pastor of a small church. And so this was an idea that a couple at our church had to do a gathering and to invite everybody at church and to invite some community members and kind of make it a mixed gathering where relationship pollination, cross-pollination can happen. I'm excited. How about you? Are you excited, Kathleen?
Yeah, and I am excited. And I think for whatever reason, I don't know about other places, but in our congregation, puzzles are a thing. And there's quite a few people in our church that love puzzles. And so one of the things that has cropped up in the last year or two is to always have a puzzle at a party. Or a gathering, because some people might feel really comfortable in talking to others during the party. But if you need something to kind of like...
We are not all extroverts.
Does that make sense?
Some people are introverts, and we love them too.
Yes. And so it gives them a place that they can feel like they belong. And it's a beautiful thing when we can create different... And it's going to be an outside party, so there's lots of different activities there. But I love that the care has been put into creating connection points for different people and that make them feel like they are loved and that they are cared for in that particular way.
Yeah. And I think it's important to because even though it's a strength of what happens in small churches, you still got to work on it some. And I think this is just an opportunity to see some of that happen. I do love that. Yeah, you got to find ways for people to interact that are different people, right? Because it's great for for some people, they could just if there's food and a place to stand and talk to other people, they're happy. That's great. We love those people. We call them extroverts, maybe extreme extroverts. They're good. They're wonderful people, but not everybody fits that category. So how do you find other ways to make sure that relationships are happening? For whatever reason, in our context, I feel like our church, we probably actually have more introverts than extroverts, although we have plenty of extroverts as well. But so maybe I just have a mind make sure that the introverts have a spot to sit. So the puzzle thing has actually been really good for that. I don't know whose idea that was. It was certainly not my idea. I am not a puzzle person. Although I do go to the puzzle table and put a couple pieces on, so I can be part of that puzzle table conversation. But I don't spend much time there because it is not something that I find particularly enjoyable. But that doesn't mean. But some people really do, and it has been a good thing. So.
Well, and I think also that it's not happening at church. This is happening at their house. I think that's helpful too. I think getting us out of our comfort zone of being in a different place. And a lot of people have been to their house or, been to a party outside their house because they've hosted before. But I think sometimes it's good to get together in different places, not just at the church building. And our church, we don't have a lot of outside space that isn't driveway space to hang out. So I think that's part of the reason too. For us, it just makes sense to go somewhere else. So I think just finding places and times for us to be together and build on our relationships. It doesn't have to be deep connection points, but that we're just spending time together, I think, is good in the relationship building. And it's good for people who are not as connected to come together as well, because it gives them more opportunities to do the relationship building. Yeah,
and I think it's one of the things that I think we have tried to encourage, and I would encourage people to do inside your church community is when they're doing, hosting maybe a party for like a very natural reason, like I can think like a graduation party or something like that, or a Christmas party, that like there doesn't have to be a version of this party that's like church people and non-church people. In fact, that would be weird, but I think sometimes we do that. But instead where it's like, no, we invite, we've tried to do this at times in the past when we've gotten people together, right? Like, yes, we want to invite some people from church because they're obviously people that we know and are friends with. But also we invite some people who live close to us and some people on the fire department, and try to, like bringing people together. But also like teaching your people who are the church people here, they're the followers of Jesus that are going to be at that like every time they're in a mixed group like this is an not that you spend the whole time like just waiting for the right moment to insert Jesus into the conversation. Like don't be awkward. Please, right? Like, but that Jesus is on the tip of your tongue all the time, ready to be part of the conversation, and maybe by name, maybe not, but that there is like this space made for and that I remember we were at a Christmas party I guess it was this last Christmas at a family from church, and of which it was a mixed party, and like somebody who was not a churchgoer but we knew asked Kathleen, I'll let you tell her, but what did she ask you?
Yeah, she was like, who are those people over there? And I'm like, oh, they go to our church. And she was like, then she like had sudden panic in her eyes, and she was like, is everybody here from your church? And I was like, oh no, I don't know that family. I don't know that that family doesn't come to our church. It's just this, these people.
But there was a lot of people there from church to say like, this is part of these relational connections. And it was a person we knew, and knew that we were pastors, obviously. But, that part was really, make moments like that happen. I think that's good. That person has not since started coming to church or anything like that. But this is part of our long-term view. Maybe she will. Maybe not too. We're praying.
Well, and she's interacted, in the past. So,
we have had church-like interactions with her in the past, definitely. So
right, and I've had some pastoral conversations with her over the years. So God is at work there, and I think just. I think it's good too that people, I think we can say, leave church at church or leave Jesus at church and forget that like Jesus, like it's easy to forget that Jesus is part of everything we do. And so this is a good reminder to everybody that whether we go to a party that is all church people or mixed or non-church people, that we are representing Jesus wherever we are. And I think that's a good reminder as well.
And not so much just that we're representing him in that, you better behave at the party. I mean, you should do that, but no, we're representing Jesus in that, like he comes along with us for the ride. And that when people interact with us, whether they know it, whether we realize it or not, the Holy Spirit's there, and they are having an interaction with the God of the universe in some way that's more significant. I mean, obviously God's there throughout their lives, but somehow when they come into interaction with us, our theology tells us that they are somehow interacting with the God of the universe in a way that's different than when they're just walking through the woods. As much as that can be beautiful and connect us to God, that's, when they bump into a Jesus follower, they are interacting with Jesus himself. And so we should, as followers of Jesus, we should have that in mind, but we should also recognize that's always good. And it just making that happen is important. So, before we talk for an entire interview time here, we should probably, because this is, as you can tell, we're a little passionate about relationships and thinking through them. Our conversation with David, what was so great about the conversation with David is we tried to wrestle through some of the stuff about relationships, and particularly the strong relationships in churches, which we all value. And I'm sure if you've heard Kathleen and I talk, if you've ever heard David talk, that we all value the strength of relationships that happen in small churches and rural places. But we talk about some of the challenges that result from them, and challenges that I don't think all three of us would be the first ones to tell you we do not have perfect solutions for. I think we have some things that we've seen that have worked, and sometimes it's gone well, and we talk a little bit about that. We talk a little bit about some of the challenges we've had with that, and we want to bring you into the conversation. So certainly we plugged it twice in there, but we'll plug it again. We have an email address. We want to hear stories about how relationships. Fostering relationships in your church has both gone well, and also maybe some places where the relationships have not been quite as spiritual, and they've been. And so we'd love to hear either way. If you've got a story that you think other people should hear, we'd like to share those stories. So what's the email address, Kathleen?
podcasts@freshexpressions.com.
So this will be your first telling now, but you're going to hear about that twice more. So there you go. Anything else about the interview we should tell them, Kathleen?
No, I just think it's always great to talk to David Blackwell about a rural church ministry, and I hope that this is as much of a blessing to you all as it was for Chris and I today.
Hi, everybody. We're back today. We're interviewing David Blackwell, and if you've been listening to the podcast since the beginning, this is the third time we've had David on the podcast. We've gotten to know David both through the podcast and some other ways. David is really, it's been wonderful to get to know you over the years, and to get, and I say years, it's been a couple of years at least, and to get to learn from some of your wisdom. And so we're excited to have you today. I think it's hopefully going to be a good, not hopefully, it's definitely going to be a good conversation about natures of relationships and things like that in church. So welcome back, David.
Thanks. It's great to be with you again. Good seeing you folks again. It's always fun to get together.
So we were actually offline talking a couple months ago, I guess, at this point, after an Ascent gathering, and we were kind of wrapping up some ideas we had about that. And we had a conversation, and you mentioned this idea that has stuck in my head and made me think. So I thought we would talk about it today on the podcast. And that is that in small and rural churches, it's important that relationships be spiritual, not social, or not just social. And so we're going to unpack that a little bit today, and so that's what I threw at you. So why don't you get us off with kind of expand on what you were thinking a little bit there, and then we'll just have a conversation about it.
Yeah, it's really neat. I think because we were at Ascent, we were working with rural churches in particular, and we were talking about the difference between the attractional church model and a relational church model, and especially for our smaller areas like this, everything is relational in our in our communities. I don't know, but I know we've talked enough to know that you live in a small town. We're in a little rural area. We're not even incorporated. We have one stoplight in the middle of the highway. That's the sum total of who we are. So everything around here is so much more relational than packaged and systemic. People don't go to events here. They go to talk to people a little bit. That's kind of the way it works. It's the rural motif that we that we that we live in, and in a lot of the church model of the last 20 or 30 years, it de-emphasizes relationships, or the power of those, of deep abiding relationships that are in rural communities. And I think that's a mistake for us. That's where this started. I was like, no, we're good at relationships. We're not good at putting fog machines in our church of 30 people to enhance the worship experience. But we're really good at relationships. So you really need to lean into who God's made you as a congregation, and embrace that piece of it. But along with that, that means that we embrace that relationality of our churches a lot more intentionally.
Yeah.
And allow it to be used by God, because it's just like anything else. Relationships can be they can be inclusive or exclusive. We can use them for discipleship, or we can use them to actually take people farther away from Christ. Those relationships are not they are empty vessels.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us to fill those vessels individually as Christians within our rural context, and corporately as churches. It's important for us to take those empty vessels and fill them with the things that will bring people closer to Christ and bring them to Christ. And so that's where this started for me. It's like, how do you make sure that relationships are being carrying the water for what Christ wants to do in people's lives. And I'm glad this is a conversation, because I don't have all the answers yet. I'm still really starting to explore this and wrestle with it on a little bit deeper level. So that was the genesis of this.
Yeah, and I think the reason, for me at least, it struck such a chord is because it is something that I know both from our church experience here in South Londonderry and in other churches, and for the most part I've been part of smaller and rural churches throughout my life and throughout ministry, is that it is, first of all, you're 100% right in that we should just recognize one of the things that it comes very naturally to us is relationship stuff, right? That we tend to be from places that create relationships easily, and our churches tend to be relational by nature. But that it is, and there's many good things about that we can lean into. It is not in and of itself the goal, and it is not. And if the relationships we're building with one another aren't pushing us towards deeper relationship with Jesus, then they're not doing what we're called to do as churches. That's for sure. So, we're called to help people, grow deeper in their relationship with Jesus. And so, so I think for me, it was, I think and I would agree, I don't have all the answers on that, because I think there are times at which and certainly I've seen great examples of when relationships have helped people in churches I've been a part of, churches we've pastored together, Kathleen, grow deeper to Jesus. But I've also seen places where the relationships, maybe didn't have that as effect. And so making sure that we're being strategic, I think, and thinking through how do we aim the relationships that are so naturally a part of what we do towards Jesus in a way that people grow closer to him, is significant. So, what do you think about that, Kathleen? Do you think?
Yeah, I think about that, and I also think about in our particular context, we have a bunch of people who are related to each other that attend our church. So not only do we have some people who have decades of relationship, but we also have people who grew up in the same household and have these jokes, from when they were kids. And, so sometimes it's hard to break into that. There is something beautiful about it. And at the same time, we don't want it just to be a relationship. We want them to be growing closer to each other, and their relationship with Jesus at the same time. And so I think there's that tension when we are trying to we're trying to break through that like familial relationship or like, decades long relationship.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Kathleen, what your observations are for those kinds of relationships. I wonder if it's similar to what we experience here. We've got some people who have those decades long relationships, and because they are on they've gone for a long time without a deepening discipling relationship. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but their relationship has been so rooted in the fact that we went to the basketball game on Friday night at the high school, and now we're at the family reunion together on Saturday, and then we're at church on Sunday, and we're going to meet down at Glenn's for coffee on Monday, because their relationship is so deeply rooted in that particular piece of their lives that when it comes time to talk about Christ together, when they start talking about spiritual things and deep matters of the heart, it actually gets more difficult for them to experience that in their lives. I see that. I've got a buddy, David Blackwell, who says we are intimate strangers, in churches like this. We know a lot about each other, but we really don't know each other. And I've seen that in our context, and I wonder if you get the similar vibe.
I would totally agree with that. I think it does create somewhat of an awkwardness in your relationship to try to bring Jesus into it, and so I don't necessarily have the answer to that, but I do see it being a part of this whole relationship thing. Is that we're trying to insert Jesus into their relationship when it's firmly established. I think that can be tricky, and that's why I think it's lovely when we can kind of break up those deep-seated relationships with like newer people. We have a couple that just started coming to our church that have done a lot of discipleship, and I'm excited to see how we can how sort of an outsider can kind of insert themselves in a way that an insider would have a harder time doing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you have a long established relationship with these people as well. So to some degree, your relationship has the parameters have been defined.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to actually say that one of the things I think early on in our time here, one of the benefits for us was that we could sometimes do, and we still can obviously, and strive to do that. Hopefully, I mean, obviously part of what God called us here to do is to bring Jesus into these relationships. But that the longer we're part of the system, and there's a lot of benefits that come with that, but there's also the longer you're part of the system and part of the relationship, the more you start to become part of the comfortableness of it, and you have to be very intentional. I have to, I think as a pastor, you have to think a lot about making sure that you're bringing Jesus back into the conversation, because you can talk with them about family dynamics or what, because you just know everything that's going, or not everything, but you know a lot about what's going on, and it can become, you can forget the purpose of the relationship. And I think new people, I think you're right, Kathleen. I was going to say, I agree that finding ways for new people to become involved actually is often a catalyst for help in that regard. And it can be sometimes people who come from the outside who, have either moved to town or whatever, right, but have church experience. But yeah, sometimes even more so when people who are coming to faith in your context, I think really gives opportunity to kind of bring back, oh yeah, that's right, we're at church. This isn't just, you're completely right, David, right? This isn't just like sitting at the basketball game together. There's nothing, it's good that we did that, but like we're at church for a different reason. We're not here just to root on the basketball team. We're here because, and Jesus is not just like the star player. Jesus is the whole point of our lives. So it really is good to try to, and someone new, and I think either someone new who doesn't know Jesus maybe, or is just getting to know Jesus, or someone maybe who has known Jesus in a very different context can be very helpful for that. So that's, I think, one thing that can help, at least that I've seen help in our context.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I've been mulling this over on how do we do it, and we've done some of this quite by accident. There are some things that I think have been successful for us. I think of course within rural church ministry, there's so many different dynamics to it. There's church size that does have something to do with the relational models, and then community dynamics. I mean, our congregation sits in a place where we've got a tremendous turnover in our community. The Bitterroot Valley, it grows slightly, but we've got people who are here like 3 and out. They think, okay, this is a beautiful place. We're going to come live here. And after the first really cold winter, and and truthfully also, they're sitting there. They move in, they love it for 2 or 3 years, and then they say, "Well, the grandkids actually live in California, so we're going to move back there to be closer to family." There's a lot of that, but that turnover in our community actually facilitates some of the relational connections that we need to be healthy. And we're a church of each of our services run about 100 each on Sunday morning. So each of those services is kind of its own individual church. So you've got a group of about 100 people that are developing relationships with each other over time. So those dynamics really help us in doing that. But we've got churches just down the road. Half hour, 45 minutes, whatever it might be. The church size is about 30 and the community is pretty static.
Yeah.
And so the dynamics for helping to develop those relationships in those contexts are very, very different than the ones I've got. Like I've got it easy. There are a couple of things that will work in my congregation to help develop relationships that do focus more spiritually and do get us out of that comfort zone of the long-standing relationships. But my buddies who've got a church of 30 in a community where everybody's known each other.
Yeah.
For a generation. I've got there are people in their 70s who talk about their third grade elementary school teacher because they were in the same class. So the dynamics, and the challenges of changing those relationships in those areas are going to be very different. And I'm curious. I would love to hear from some folks who are in those areas and things they've tried and things that might be successful. In doing that. I know that in our context, a couple of things that we've tried to do that have helped. It wasn't an idea that we created. It's one that I ran across and we did it. We call them salt shaker dinners, where we intentionally set up meals amongst 6 to 8 people. And we do our dead level best to make sure that they are, we know our people well enough to know this is a friendship group. So let's make sure we space those 4 couples out in different in different dinners and things like that, forcing people into some new relationships just for an evening and hopefully maybe something will sprout out of that. But creating those relationships that in a different context. That works a little bit for us in making sure that you kind of break the cycle of those long-term relationships. The other piece of it that we've had is we make sure we've got some Bible studies that are really open discussion. We've got an old-fashioned men's breakfast group that we say, okay, we're going right now. We're finishing up the book of Acts. It's like you show up, you eat breakfast, you talk with guys about what's going on for the week for a half hour, and then you sit down and you read the chapter and say, okay, what jumps out? And it starts to facilitate that spiritual conversation in a larger group setting, where it's where it's kind of actually less intimidating because the relationships are weaker there, and that starts to bleed over into with some coaching along the way, it bleeds over into some of those other relationships. So that works in our context. I don't know, but like I said, there's a critical mass there that allows you to, we've got, we can take people from a small group and space them out among 3 or 4, different dinners. If your church, if it's for smaller churches where it's 30 people, your small group is that,
Yeah.
and they know each other so well, it's hard to create that dynamic. So I actually would be curious to hear from some folks on how they might go about
yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening to this, we do have an email address that you can email us at. It's podcasts@freshexpressions.com. And we would love to hear your thoughts on this, because I think it is really helpful. Yesterday was Sunday, and during our worship service once a month, we take prayer requests during the service and pray and praises as well. And we used to do it weekly, but we found that monthly is working for us right now. And one of the things that struck me is I think that it gives us an opportunity. So discipleship can happen within the worship service. I don't think that's the primary focus of it, but it gave a chunk of time for people to talk about spiritual things, that it was safe, because sometimes it's hard to come to church and say, hey, this really hard thing is happening in my life, or, my family member's life. But when you're asked specifically in a group setting, we'd love to pray for you. We'd love to celebrate your praises, that kind of thing. And we had some people who were really, who were opening up about, it was appropriate for a worship service, but, people talking about asking for prayers for peace, or a family member going into rehab, or family members who've had surgery, that kind of thing. And I think giving opportunities for people to talk about spiritual things in a safe way, because I think sometimes we get so comfortable, it's hard to actually talk about those things. It's easy to come to church on Sunday and to kind of pretend that everything's okay, even if it's not okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I would say, for context, for so we have, 35 to 45, 50 people is sort of a pretty typical Sunday for us. And so, yeah, it's interesting, David, because we're probably just big enough where you can kind of split people up into like two groups, maybe. But it is. And we have a little bit of people do, because of the nature of where we live, people do kind of move in and move out, at least some people, and then we have a big steady state population that kind of has been here. So we kind of fit maybe a hybrid between that town where 30 people come to church, and basically everybody who lives in town has lived there for a long time. We don't have huge turnover in town. We do have some though, and I think that makes it. It in terms of the relationships that happen, I think it means that building those spaces where people are getting to know different things about one another. One thing I was thinking that I think I've seen help for us sometimes has been when we can take on a project's probably the wrong word, but a new mission opportunity for the church, right? Is a way to get people to think differently again. So, of course, in a quite small church, you can only take on so many of those things. People have a limited amount of capacity. You as a pastor have a limited amount of capacity. So, but when we have been able to do that, and especially when people get excited about it, that's another thing that brings in. It reminds people that and so maybe there's a need in your town that somebody that has come to light because something happened in town, maybe, or maybe it's somebody, maybe a family member of somebody at church has been affected by it, and all of a sudden the church can kind of take it on as something. Hey, maybe there's something we can do to address this. A couple months ago we had Corey on the podcast, and he talked about mental health stuff and how they kind of saw that. And yeah, it doesn't have to be mental, but finding something new your church can be passionate about, and small churches do that kind of stuff. In a small town, you can have a big impact even if you've only got 30 people coming to church on Sunday in terms of what you can do in your community. And so, finding that space, I think that can help a little bit too. I don't think that's a silver bullet that's going to solve it all the time, but making sure it's just another way to remind people, like, we're not just here because this is what we do on Sunday morning and we're here sitting together and we're going to listen to, we're going to sing a couple songs, listen to a sermon, and then we're going to talk about the weather for 20 minutes after the service, right? We're here to get to know Jesus. So. Yeah.
And just to piggyback off of that a little bit. Yeah, I read an article this week, or as I was preparing for this. It's an article by a guy named Carl Green from the Rural Church Institute, and he talked about service projects or service opportunities as a place to develop what he calls weak relationships. And weak relationships, he says, are actually important in the life of a rural church. Certainly we've got those strong connections that we've been talking about that develop in so many different contexts over time. But he said lifeblood in a rural church can be those weak relationships where you are developing a different platform, and you're coming to those relationships from a different perspective. It's not a very deeply personal connection, but it is a missional connection. And he said those are places where God can really get into people's lives and work. And I just to make sure we emphasize this along the way, we're as we talk about this, those very deep, abiding relationships are good things.
Yes.
I don't want anybody to think we're talking about an either or thing here, that you've got to jettison, your girlfriend Hetty that you've known since the third grade in order to be working with Jesus. That deep, abiding relationship is so important in our lives, and that it's actually a strength of a rural church, the places where you and I work for Jesus. Those things are strengths. We're not talking about jettisoning those. I didn't still get the word. But what we are suggesting is we need to make sure that we layer on top of that the spiritual connections that allow us to talk about some of the great joys that God has brought into our lives, and deal with some of the deep hurts that we need God's comfort and peace for in our lives as well. And on a personal level, that's what we need as individuals, and then corporately, we need those weaker relationships that allow some space for others to find a connecting point in our lives. Kathleen, you were talking about it a minute ago when you talked about the inside jokes that families have, and somebody who walks in and they don't get it, or they don't know it, they have no context for that story, it automatically makes some distance between us, and making sure that we're creating some spaces where there are no inside jokes.
Right. And I think also that as pastors, we can be sort of fill in the gaps sometimes there. So I know that I try to get contact information pretty early on if someone starts coming to our church. Because not only do I want to connect with them, but I also want to be a resource to them if they want to. One time, maybe a year or two ago, we had a new family coming to church, and somehow someone at church had gotten her phone number, but she didn't know the person from church's phone number. And so she got like a group text was included in a group text, which I think is lovely, but she had no idea who was in this group text. So I had to provide some, that's so-and-so and that's so-and-so and that kind of thing. But I think, and it can be as they acclimate and get used to the community, answering questions about that, about school or that kind of thing. But I think as pastors, we can kind of fill the gaps when newer people are coming in and trying to find their place and figure out how our church sort of operates. I think that is a helpful thing to keep in mind when we are trying to we're trying to not be exclusive. We're trying to include everyone as they're trying to become a part of our church family.
Yeah, and I would say the smaller your church is, probably the more important that is. And I think it's part of it is just modeling too. I mean, I think something our church does better than probably when we first arrived is people do. Because one of the things I think we basically try to model to them is like, we're a small church. You're going to get plenty of time with your pastor if you're at our church, right? We're going to see you in lots of different circumstances. You're going to get to ask us any questions you want. You've known us a long time at this point, and we're happy to have those conversations. But like when it's either after church with someone new, or if we're in a situation, we're at a social gathering that may be church related or not, and there are other people, our focus is probably going to be on them, not so much on these long-standing, strong relationships that we have. It doesn't mean that we're ignoring those relationships, but it means that and part of, obviously that's just kind of good from a pastoral standpoint, but I think it's good that our people learn to do that too. Not everybody. I mean, some of this is introvert versus extrovert kind of thing. Like some people, if they're in a big setting or in a group setting and they know somebody, they just want to latch on if you're an introvert maybe. But to the extent that people are that are able, you want to kind of help them to recognize like you're going to have space for these relationships that are long established, and because people will feel not intentionally. I think most small churches, I know certainly I'll speak for ours, I guess, because I can. People at church genuinely want to bring other people into the relationships that they have. They are there. It's not that they want to have a close-knit or closed club or anything like that. I'm sure there are churches where that happens, but for the most part, I think it doesn't. I think mostly people want that, but because of these strong relationships, it can become very hard to bring to help people kind of connect. And so modeling that, I think, is important. Finding ways to bring people into those weak relationships. Like that's actually a really neat idea, David, that you bring people into these maybe shared tasks and things like that, where they get the chance to start to build stronger relationships with each other too, so that there's an understanding that it's okay that not everybody has these, you don't, to be part of our church, you don't have to have this 50-year relationship where, you went to third grade together, you had kids that went to third grade together, and now now you have grandkids together. That's great. And you're 100% right. I do not, no part of me. One of the things I loved about our church, I may have shared this before on a podcast, but I'm going to say it again. One of the first things I found when we moved here, this is before our church fire, way back in the old building, I was digging through some stuff just to get to know the history of our church. And I found this picture of three little girls. Well, they weren't little. They were like 13-year-old girls getting on their baptism day. And I think it was like 1938 or maybe it was late 30s, early 40s. And the three women still came to our church every Sunday, and they were sitting in the same pew. They were all widows at that point, sitting together at church. It was amazing. It's such a beautiful story. But you don't have to be that in order to be, that's great. And I want to commend those. You also don't have to be that to be part of our church, right? It's an amazing story, but not necessary.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing. Yeah. And, Jesus managed that so well. I'm still trying to figure out how he, how he did that. I did a sermon series a while back. It's been 5 years ago now, but I said, here's your phone number, 120-1231. And I said, I had everybody memorize it because of the four different groups with which Jesus related throughout the course of his ministry. Obviously, beyond the outreach where he fed 5,000 and things like that. If you look at his ministry, he had an entourage. He had a church, if you want to put it that way, of about 120. Yeah. That's how many were in the upper room. And then he had this smaller group of 12, and then he had this very intimate group of three, Peter, James, and John, and then, of course, his relationship with God. And that's kind of the relational paradigm for Jesus as he lived out life on this earth, and teaching people teaching ourselves. I'll just say, me learning to model that is a challenge while remaining open to the Samaritan woman at the well, or a conversation with Nicodemus.
Yep.
This is how Jesus, Jesus managed that so wonderfully and so perfectly, and learning to do that myself and helping the folks in our congregation to learn to model that is really important in our rural congregations. I don't have a complete handle on it yet. We've got some success stories where people arrived and somebody took them under their wing as a mentor. I'm thinking in the, hey, when you said it's pastoral connections, that resonated with me, Chris, because I was like, okay, yeah, here are people where I said, oh, you flew airplanes. Let me introduce you to Roger.
Yes.
He's landed in Antarctica. So, I mean,
that's cool.
Facilitating some of those things. So we've got some wonderful success stories like that, and then we've got some abject failures where you run into somebody who comes in and says, "Yeah, I came to your church a couple of times, and nobody said two words to me, and off I went." And I'm just like, "Oh man," and it's just really it is a real challenge. To allow and to simultaneously have people layering what Christ is doing in their lives on top of those social relationships and letting them get deeper. And at the same time, creating those weak relationships where there's room for somebody else to join to be part of the gathering and what God's doing here, because it's just because we all have a relational bandwidth. We are limited in the number of relationships that we can have.
Yeah, and I think you're pointing to Jesus in that regard, right? I mean, if Jesus was limited in the bandwidth of the relationships he had, woe unto us when we think we're somehow going to not be limited in those ways. But I think that's another thing that is helpful. The intentionality with which Jesus really seemed to navigate that. He knew the ways that he was navigating those relationships. And your points about your point about the Samaritan woman and about Nicodemus, and that he left enough space in there that when these moments appeared, he could take advantage of them. And there's a reason, we all always stand in awe of Jesus. Here's another reason to do it, right? His ability to just know what his limitations as Jesus, his human limitations, to know what they were, to know where to get access to, God does not have those limitations, and Jesus knew just how to get access to those, right? How to go to his Father when he needed, when something more was needed, and we just have to, we're obviously not going to do as good a job of it as Jesus did, but learning to navigate that and to know what our limitations are, and to know how to seek the help of God when it's necessary there, how to facilitate other relationships. We see that Jesus, one of the things that's amazing too about Jesus is that all these people that he had these close relationships with then went on to kind of, we see the examples of this throughout Acts and throughout the early scriptures of Jesus's disciples becoming disciplers who were able to create their own networks of people around them who they could share Jesus with. And so obviously that's ultimately what we're up to as churches. We want to be places where people, the work is not entirely ours. Even in a small rural church where often the work does sometimes feel like it's entirely ours. It's not. That's not how ministry works. It never has been. So it's, bringing people to the place where they can multiply the same kind of things that God's called us to do. So, yeah. Not easy to do, though. I think, there's going to be times where you feel like you did it great, and then times here where you look back and you say, boy, could have done a lot better with that one. So I've definitely been on both sides of that one before.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation, and we might not have all the answers, but I think it's good for us to talk through this, and we would love for our listeners to chime in. Again, you can email us at podcasts@freshexpressions.com, and we also have a Facebook group. It's the Rural Renewal Podcast group, and if you can't find it on Facebook, you can email us and we can can send you the link for that. But if you want to have more conversations around this, we would love to be a part of that. And if you really enjoy this conversation with David, we would love to invite you to come to Steeple to Street. It's an event at Messiah College in Pennsylvania in late September. We would love, he's going to be there, and we have a lot of other great people who are in the midst of ministry and really trying to help people in churches to connect their community and really have some great fruit that comes out of that. So we'll put that in the show notes as well. We would love for you to join us. Chris and I will be there as well, and so it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and so that gives we're gonna I think we're gonna drive.
We're gonna
right?
drive.
That's the plan. Is we're gonna drive. So if we're that's like a 7-hour drive for us. So if you're within 7 hours of or if you want to fly, but if you're within 7 hours, it'll be worth it. David's gonna fly. I don't think he's driving from Montana. So not the same. But yeah, it should be a lot of fun. And ultimately, we're in this together. I think that's what we want to learn from people and learn the successes of people, and we'd love to hear how things haven't gone as well, because we can learn from that as well. If you've got a story to share, we'd love to hear that too, because I think that's part of how we're all just in this together, trying to figure out how we can do what God's calling us to do better each day.
Well, David, we really appreciate you joining us for the podcast today and talking about this really important topic.
I always love being with you guys. It's just awesome to reconnect again, and seriously, for if you're listening in, jot down some of your relational stories or your relational questions, because we are just figuring out how to navigate this ourselves. That's for sure. Your insight may be the insight that we all need to layer what Christ is doing in our lives on top of these long-standing type relationships, and we would appreciate it.
We would.
Rural Renewal Podcast is brought to you by Fresh Expressions and the Ascent Movement. Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in places we eat, live, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. The mission of the Ascent Movement is to create a thriving, collaborative connection for the church to live out the Great Commission in today's context. One of the initiatives of the movement is the Mustard Seed Initiative. Inspired by the message in the parable of the mustard seed, the Mustard Seed Initiative seeks to empower small churches across North America, enabling them to grow in faith and impact within their communities.
To connect with this podcast, you can email us at podcasts@freshexpressions.com. Rural Renewal Podcast is hosted by Kathleen Blackie and Chris Blackie. It's edited by Joel Limbowen and produced by Kathleen Blackie and Jeanette Statz. Our senior director is Shannon Kaiser. A special thank you to Brad and Joni Perry of Alabaster Grace for the use of their music for our podcast.
If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media.
May God be merciful and bless us. May his face smile with favor on us. May your ways be known throughout the earth, your saving power among people everywhere. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Let the whole world sing for joy, because you govern the nations with justice and guide the people of the whole world. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Then the earth will yield its harvest, and God, our God, will richly bless us. Yes, God will bless us, and people all over the world will fear him. Psalm 67.